What about lusting, sir? Jesus warned that if you lust in your mind. So you've broken the commandment of adultery, correct, sir?
Well, none of your business.
All right. So what we basically done is determine how you'd be doing on Judgment Day. It doesn't sound like you'd measure up at all to God's 10 Commandments.
Who gives a
Well, we're just playing a little game of what if.
Yes, I'm playing it right along with you.
It's true, sir. Can't you at least admit, yes, that would have been an act of kindness? I just don't believe that it happened.
No, I
can't give that up.
But I have quite a long discussion of this in my book. You're not trying anything on me that's original or all that daring or playful. I make that assumption and examine it in my book. I say here's what my reaction is to this offer. Please look it up, and please encourage your listeners to do like.
Has been hailed as one of the most brilliant journalists of our time, according to the London Observer. He's a contributing editor, ironically, for Vanity Fair. He was named one of the top 100 public intellectuals by Foreign Policy and Britain's Prospect. He studied in Cambridge and Oxford, and now he just hates God. He's the author of God is Not Great. He is Christopher Hitchens.
Wow, fancy that. Christopher, thanks very much for being with us, sir.
Hello.
Christopher, we're going to have you play a game show today called What If. Are you game?
Sounds all right.
All right, here's what we've got for you, sir. We are going to play a game. I'm going to create some fantastic scenarios, and then you tell me, sir, what your response would be if these things happen to be true. Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Here's the first one. Now, I realize for you, sir, the author of God is Not Good, that you don't believe in God, but what if...
God is not great, excuse me.
God is not great. What?
Now in paperback at fine bookstores everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So what if God actually exists, sir? And what if he actually has provided everything for you? He's granted you life. He has given you health. He has given you food. He's given you the trees to write your screed against him. He's provided you royalties. It all came from him. What if that is true? Sir, would he not have been good to you?
No. He wouldn't. Because if that were true, it would mean that I had an eternal supervising parent who would never die and let me get on with my life, never let me grow up, keep me under surveillance.
But you have, sir.
And supervision every minute of my life.
But you
constantly asked me to be thanking and praising him.
Yeah.
I think it would
that
be
wasn't part
like,
of the
it would be
scenario.
like living in North Korea. I think it would be a horrible outcome.
Well, not sure that God is Kim Jong-il, but what if what I said is true?
Well, Kim Jong-il, he has a different opinion.
Uh-huh. So if that is the God who's made you and created you, he's allowed you to live your life, shouldn't that be a sign of kindness to you?
No.
Oh.
I don't want anyone's permission to live my life, thanks.
All righty. Well, it's not that you've been asked or that you asked him.
I think it's servile, and one is expected to constantly grovel as a result.
All right. Christopher Hitchens, round 2 of What If. What if God exists? He's provided everything for you. He's kept you together by the power of his word. If that is truly God, do you believe that God, if he's provided everything for you, has rights on your life?
No.
Because?
Why should he? What gives him this right?
Because he owns you. He's created everything for you. He's kept you alive.
I don't want to be owned. I don't want to be owned, and I don't recognize anyone's right to own me.
Remember, we're playing a game of what if.
I wrote my book exactly to teach people to emancipate themselves from the man-made slavery of religion, and you're giving the perfect instance of what I mean. I don't acknowledge anyone's ownership of myself.
I know you don't acknowledge it, but what if he is God?
Suppose that I grant your premise about him having made me and even treated me well, still doesn't give anyone ownership rights. Any more than I have these for my children.
Okay, so even though he keeps you alive, he causes you to breathe, he provides you food and everything that is good, the author of God is not great, how religion poisons everything, which is I hope, hyperbole, but even so.
No, it isn't. Not if it postulates that I'm someone who's owned by someone else.
All right. So
that would ruin everything for me if it were true.
Okay. So ownership is a bad thing?
Of people, yes.
Oh, okay.
It's been widely considered. I mean, I know the Bible does call for slavery as it calls for genocide, but that doesn't make it right.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't. But we're playing what if.
It might be you. I don't know. You may take the Bible seriously for all I know.
Oh, I sure do. What if there's a judgment day, sir? Just what if? What if? I know a crazy scenario for you. But a day when God causes you to give an account for every thought, every word, every deed, how do you think you'd do on that day, sir?
Well, I would ask by what right.
That's not the question. How would you do?
If someone stops me and says, I've got a few questions for you, I say, excuse me, I'm in a hurry. Who are you to be posing these questions?
Well, what if he's God and he made you and he has the right? What if?
The question,
how would you do?
The most ancient question is still quo warranto, by what right?
Mm-hmm.
This right can't just be assumed.
All right. If it's true, remember, we're just playing a little fantasy game
here. Yes, I
here.
understand. I'm telling you what my reaction would be.
All right. So how would you, if for instance, if he ran you through the 10 Commandments, his standard of goodness and perfection, how do you think you'd measure up, sir?
Well, on the initial burst, which are all about his jealousy and his envy and his self-esteem and how one has to respect that, nix on those. I don't care for those. I don't obey them and never have tried to. Don't think anyone should. Don't think anyone needs to. Same for the Sabbath. Same for the Sabbath.
You haven't done well with that.
Same for the Sabbath. I don't give a damn about the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Murder, theft, and perjury. I know. Thanks a lot. I know without being told that those are not kosher.
Mm-hmm.
Honor the father and the mother. It rather depends how they behave towards me. And there's no commandment about taking care of your children. There's no prohibition of child abuse any more than there's any prohibition of slavery or genocide in the Ten Commandments. So I don't care about those either particularly.
Have you made any graven images?
Coveting, I think, is a good thing because it leads to emulation and innovation. It's a spur to do better if you're jealous or envious of other people's property. However,
so you've pretty much kept the Ten Commandments.
I don't approve. Of course, it's wrong to take that property. It's not wrong to wish you had it yourself. And I don't, of course, approve of lumping in women with oxen and asses.
All right. So specifically, sir, have you ever taken God's name in vain?
I've never completely known. And this is only in the King James translation, which is the one I know best. Quite what that means.
That you've used God's name in a low way. Instead of using a 4-letter filth word, you use the name of God to express disgust.
No, not in that way. No, I don't believe I have.
Really? GD, nothing like that has ever flown out of your mouth?
Not as a filth expression.
No, as a
or not
expression,
instead of a filth expression.
Dragging God's name through the mud, you've substituted his name with a swear word. Have you ever had God? Did you ever put God first in your life, sir? Has he ever been number one for Christopher Hitchens?
He's been nowhere for me, as he is in point of fact.
So the first, second, and third commandments you broke, and the Sabbath you admitted to that. I'm sure you were naughty as a child, correct?
I don't admit it.
Yeah, but you were naughty as a child, correct?
Excuse me. It's not an admission.
The whole God gave you life, so he owns you argument is moral slavery dressed up as gratitude. Creating someone does not give you the right to control them forever. Parents create children too, but decent parents raise them to become free adults, not worship machines. The Bible's own logic exposes the problem. Exodus 20 demands worship, obedience, and fear before it even gets to murder. That is authoritarianism with a halo. In the transcript, the pushback is clear. Being created does not erase personal freedom.
Assertion.
Did your parents ever get upset with you as a child, sir?
I dare say they did.
Because you were naughty, so you broke that commandment. Murder.
How do you know that's what it was for?
I'm just guessing you're like every other kid I've seen.
But that might not have made them upset.
Mm-hmm. Because
it's rather pathetic to have children and then expect them not to be naughty, don't you think?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the expectation is that they should be.
I don't know. Are you a father?
Yes, sir, I am. Sir, have you ever committed murder?
No.
Have you ever been angry with somebody?
Repeatedly and justifiably.
No.
Well, I should better say that I don't want to sound smug. Justifiably and unjustifiably, fairly and unfairly.
Because the Bible says
anger is very
heart.
important.
Yeah.
Anger is an emotion without which the human species couldn't do. We're on to deadly sins now, aren't we? Not commandments.
Well, I would suggest that righteous anger is good, but if you've been unrighteously angry, then you are committed murder in your heart, because God examines our thoughts and our intentions and our desires.
You should have just asked me if I've committed murder in my heart. I've certainly done that.
Okay, so you've broken the commandment of thou shalt not murder. What about lusting, sir? Jesus warned that if you lust in your mind. So you've broken the commandment of adultery, correct, sir?
Well, none of your business.
All righty. So what we basically done is determine how you'd be doing on Judgment Day. It doesn't sound like you'd measure up at all to God's 10 Commandments.
Who gives a
Well, we're just playing a little game of what if.
Yes, I'm playing it right along with you.
All righty. So what would God do
I'm
with
glad
you,
you think
sir?
it's a game, by the way.
What would you do?
I rather agree with you.
What would God do with you if he found you guilty of breaking his laws? Would he send you to heaven or hell? What if?
Well, not heaven, I hope.
Mm-hmm. So what would a just God do with somebody like you?
An eternity of praise and groveling and thanksgiving would be my idea of hell.
Mm-hmm. So he'd send you to
I have no idea.
All right. If it's true, if he judged you by the standard of the 10 Commandments, you'd be going to hell.
If you believe in the God of the Old Testament, not, because there's no hell mentioned in the Old Testament. It's only with the punishment of the dead is not specified.
Right.
There, as I just say you know.
Right.
It's only with gentle Jesus, meek and mild, that the idea of eternal torture for minor transgressions is introduced.
So speaking
So I'm not
of
sure
Jesus,
you know quite what you're talking about.
So speaking of Jesus, if, sir, remember we're playing what if it's true that God exists he came to this earth, Jesus Christ, the God-man, the Savior of souls, and he took the punishment that you deserve for breaking God's moral laws. He died on a cross for you. He rose from the dead and defeated death. Let's say that it's true, sir. He died knowing that you, Christopher Hitchens, would spend all of your calories and energy on fighting against him, but he died for you anyway. Would that not be the single greatest act of kindness in the history of your life, if not in the world?
No, it would not.
How come?
Because if I'd had the power or had actually been present, I would have done everything possible to prevent a human sacrifice from being enacted, whether the person concerned wanted it or not.
Yeah, but let's just say it happened.
It's barbaric, and no one has the right or the duty to immolate themselves for me. I don't want it. I didn't ask for it, and I'm not bound by it.
Yeah, that's not the question, though. If it happened, would it not be an act of kindness?
No. It would be an act of extreme arrogance. It would be an act of extreme presumption, saying, what I'm doing now binds someone who hasn't yet been born. It takes away my free will, takes away my autonomy. It gives me no choice in the matter. I've told... I'm sorry, it's too bad. The sacrifice has already been made. You're committed. What is this but a very, very crude form of tyranny and intimidation?
Well, it seems like you have the right to reject it. You've done a fine job to date. So if it's true, sir, can't you at least admit, yes, that would have been an act of kindness? I just don't believe that it happened.
No. I've thought about it quite a lot. But I have quite a long discussion of this in my book. You're not trying anything on me that's original or all that daring or playful. I make that assumption and examine it in my book. I say here's what my reaction is to this offer. Please look it up, and please encourage your listeners to do likewise.
But, sir, we're playing a little fantasy game.
I understand perfectly. I'm not as slow on the uptake as you seem to suppose. How many times do I have to tell you? I make the assumption along with you, and I give you my response to it. I don't think it would be an act of kindness.
All right. What if...
I think it would be I think it's a tyrannical act.
It's a tyrannical act that somebody sacrificed his life for you?
But according to you, he didn't.
All right.
Because he was seen alive very shortly after these supposed events.
Yeah. That'd be the resurrection from the dead.
Did he die or what?
Yeah, he did, and rose from the dead. It's called Easter. Been celebrated for a couple thousand years.
To no effect.
Okay. I'm sure that it hasn't affected anybody.
He was supposed to come back in the lifetime of his listeners. That was a direct promise.
It just depends on your understanding of eschatology. Sir, let me play another round of What If before we close our time together with Christopher Hitchens. What if the Bible is accurate? Sir, I want to share a quote with you from the Bible, all right, sir? For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they/you are without excuse. Does that sound like you, sir?
No, it sounds like St. Paul.
Right, but does it sound like he's describing you in Romans 1?
No.
You're not suppressing the obvious truth that there's a creator because you, sir, prefer to live your own autonomous way.
No, St. Paul is nearer the mark when he talks about the evidence of things not seen, and when he admits that most of this is supposition, and the things he's claiming to know cannot be known by anyone.
So, sir, you're familiar with the Prince of Preachers, Charles Spurgeon, correct?
No.
You've never heard of Charles Spurgeon?
I've heard the name. I can't sound familiar.
The Prince of Preachers, he said regarding a fellow like you, somebody who fights and wars against God, typically, if you want to know the reason why, just follow him home. Sir, is it possible that the reason you rage so much against God is because you just want to live your own autonomous way, living any way that you want to, any lifestyle that you prefer without being accountable to your Creator?
I think that's highly probable, yes.
All right. Excellent. Sir, we appreciate your time. The book is called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Absolutely 100% Everything. Sir, we're grateful for your time. Thanks for playing our little game.
Anytime.
Goodbye, sir.
The host is annoying because he keeps acting like Hitchens is confused when he clearly understands the argument better than the person asking it. Turning anger into murder in your heart and lust into adultery comes from Matthew 5. But that does not make it moral reasoning. It makes normal human emotions into thought crimes. Psychology recognizes anger and desire as basic human experiences, not automatic evil. Then the argument jumps to hell, even though the Old Testament is vague about punishment after death. That is why the pressure tactic falls apart. Hitchens is not dumb. He is refusing emotional blackmail dressed up as justice.
Very simply and briefly, was Leon Trotsky a good guy or a bad guy? Bob?
I don't think he was a good thing. I mean, he had a lot of good things about him as a person, but he wasn't a good thing for anybody at any time.
Christopher?
He's one of the very few people of the communist movement about whom it would be worth asking that question.
All right. Segment 1, Trotsky and Revolution. Leon Trotsky, born in Russia in 1879, second only to Lenin. Trotsky leads the Russian Revolution in October 1917. On Lenin's death, Trotsky finds himself outmaneuvered by Stalin. In exile, Trotsky writes his autobiography and an attack on Stalin called The Revolution Betrayed. In Mexico City in 1940, Trotsky is assassinated by an agent of Stalin's secret police. Let's begin at the beginning. Trotsky is born to a farming family in Russia, in what is today in southern Ukraine. How do you go from a farm family to effectively second in command in the revolution of 1917?
He comes from a farmer's family where there's a huge impetus towards education. His father is pretty uneducated, but like a lot of Jewish colonists down in that part of the world,
The Pale of Settlement.
the Pale of Settlement in what is now Ukraine, he wanted to get his children educated, and he sends them off to Christian schools. Actually, Trotsky didn't have a university-level education, but he had a very thorough Lutheran church education in science, in languages, and all the rest of it. So if you want to get on and join the professions, that's quite difficult for a Jew in the Russian Empire of those days. But you could also become a revolutionary, and that way you could rise very quickly to the top.
So, I think, let me over to you. What I hear here...
Good career move.
Yes, it's exactly that you're suggesting you became a revolutionary as a career move. Christopher?
And you're leaving out, or we're in danger of leaving out, or leapfrogging to 1917 and omitting 1905, which I think is his baptism, his crucible as a revolutionary, where he became a tremendous speaker in whatever you want to call it, Petrograd, Petersburg, where the idea of the Soviet as the parliament was, alternative Duma was first put forward. Where the revolutionaries conducted themselves as if they were speaking for a democratic majority rather than a factional minority. And where they impressed everyone by their demeanor at trial before they were sent off to Siberia. The great missed opportunity for Russia is 1905.
Yes.
Because if that doesn't work, then it's another decade of Tsarism and then a terrifying war, which is the wreckage of the whole country.
You've just, what is this, 600 and some pages, I think, Bob?
Yeah, it's far too big.
Well, but it's the point. If I had your books here on Lenin and Stalin, this is about, you are treating Leon Trotsky as a figure of major importance in the 20th century. Why? Give me a sentence or two to help a layman understand why this figure matters to you.
He's one of the half-dozen outstanding Marxist revolutionaries. He helps to make the October Revolution that brings the communists to power in 1917. He's a leader of the Red Army that fights the Civil War, and he's the intellectual architect of a lot of aspects of communism that get laid down in the 20s and actually still have an impact through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Which now leads me to ask you why you called yourself a Trotskyist. There's something in this man you admire, something in his writings to which you adhere?
Yes, the struggle of the left opposition against Stalin in the 1920s led to a sort of emulating movement, an anti-Stalinist Marxist left in the rest of Europe and Asia, in fact everywhere, America, Latin America. Usually rather small, but often quite intellectually influential. The thing about Trotsky to echo something Professor Service was saying, is that he combined in himself the role of man of action and man of ideas. He could write about literature, and did. He helped to write the Surrealist Manifesto with André Breton and people of that kidney. He could hold forth on an amazing number of subjects, but he was a soldier as well and a revolutionary, and a person of immense moral and physical courage. So you had a charismatic figure who, in addition, I'll just make one more point.
Yes.
Wrote pamphlets and made speeches against the menace of Hitlerism, which are much better and were made much earlier than any of Winston Churchill's. They are. Irving Howe describes them as the greatest political polemic ever written in the 19th century.
I just spotted something. We've got just about 1 minute left in this segment, but I think I spotted something. You just spoke about Leon Trotsky in roughly the same way I've heard you describe George Orwell. Same tones of admiration for much of the same reason.
George Orwell was
true?
Well, no. But I can see what you must be noticing. In fact,
man of actions,
George Orwell.
Man of the left, standing.
George Orwell joined a sort of Trotsky-ish or Trotsky sympathizing, not actually officially Trotskyist, but a militia that had a lot of Trotskyist influence in it in Spain to fight against both Stalin and Hitler.
All right. Segment 2. Defeat and exile. On the death of Lenin in 1924, a succession struggle takes place among Stalin, Trotsky, and others. Trotsky does not do too well. By 1927, he's removed from the Central Committee. In 1928, he's sent into internal exile, and in 1929, he's expelled from the Soviet Union, to which he never returns. What is taking place during those 5 years between the death of Lenin and the expulsion from the Soviet Union of Trotsky?
There's a factional struggle, and the left opposition, as Christopher has been saying, posed the idea that the revolution was finished under its existing leadership of Stalin and others, and that compromises had been made with the revolutionary spirit of the October events of 1917.
And this is Trotsky's position. He's a purist. He wants to return.
Well, he says he is. He says he is. But actually, most of his ideas overlap considerably with those of Stalin. The amount of dancing on the end of a pin, a number of angels dancing on the end of a pin on this question are very considerable. And I think that it's a mistake to take Trotsky at his own face value, to take his words at their face value.
Robert Service, I quote you from your forthcoming biography, Trotsky. I became convinced that Trotsky's diagnoses of the causes of his defeat by Stalin was self-serving and misleading. Trotsky did not go down to defeat at the hands of the bureaucracy. He lost to a man with a superior understanding of Soviet public life. Explain that.
Stalin understood how the system worked. They were all bureaucrats. Trotsky said he was criticizing bureaucrats, that it was a bureaucratic system, and he was on the outside of it, criticizing the bureaucrats. But when you don't have a free press, an autonomous judiciary, when there is no pluralist politics at all, then everyone's carrying out orders in an administrative political system. So his critique in the 1920s of Stalinism, as it was emerging, was a false critique. It was based on lack of self-knowledge.
Well, was it a false critique, or was it a critique that was true but to which he himself failed to live up? To end with a proposition. Good grief, that's a mess. But in other words, is there something in what he says, even if there's a bit of hypocrisy or more than a bit in his saying?
Well, he's rehearsing for what he does later call Revolution Betrayed, and I think the great area where
his book against Stalin, which he writes in exile.
And he says that the great point where he thinks the revolution is being betrayed is in the essentially Stalinist concept and bureaucratic concept of socialism in one country. Trotsky felt the revolution had to keep going in order to survive and needed to ignite counterpart, or brother or sister revolutions in two countries in particular, Germany and China. And Stalin was not in favor of revolution internationalist policy in either place.
Here, the point gets bigger than one religion. Any belief system becomes dangerous when it claims history, morality, and power all belong to one sacred mission. That is how revolutions turn into purges, and how churches defend cruelty while calling it virtue. The transcript shows Trotsky praised as a man of ideas and action, but also tied to a movement that produced dictatorship, censorship, and state violence. Christianity has the same pattern when it demands obedience first and questions later. Blind faith, whether religious or political, is how humans hand their minds to authority.
Now, I would totally disagree with you. I think the evidence is really strong that all the communist leadership, the entire communist leadership in the 1920s, knew that the October Revolution in Russia would not survive unless it could expand. It couldn't survive in an isolated state. The only difference, serious difference between Trotsky and Stalin was what were the chances of a successful German revolution. So that, for example, in the attempt...
And Trotsky rated them as higher.
Trotsky rated them as
Stalin
higher.
Lord, do I hate using this term of him, but he's a conservative figure in a certain sense. He wants to consolidate. Figure. He wants to consolidate the gains within Russia first. Fair?
Yeah, well, yes, and conservative, to the point of, yes, reactionary.
They all wanted to expand the revolution. Internationalism wasn't just an ideological imperative, it was a practical one, because if Russia stayed isolated, it would always be vulnerable to a crusade against it by Germany or Britain or France or the USA.
Right. Richard Pipes, Christopher, in his history of the Russian Revolution, quote, "In theory, one can conceive of Trotsky grasping the torch from the dying Lenin. What one cannot conceive is how he could have been in a position to do so. Lenin ensured that the man who controlled the Central Party apparatus controlled the state, and that man was Stalin," close quote. So it's not Stalin destroying the beautiful prospect by wresting control of the revolution from Trotsky. It's the very founder of the Soviet state ensuring that Stalin will succeed him.
Even though at the last, Lenin realized he'd made a mistake, and that Stalin was a very crude and ruthless machine man.
By the way, do we know that established that Lenin effectively attempted to change his mind?
Yes.
But he was it is established.
There's a reasonably, with what I think you'll agree, it's a good book, Professor Moshe Lewin's book, it's called Lenin's Last Struggle, about the realization, but it doesn't negate what Pipes says about Stalin being made inevitable by Lenin to that extent. Isaac Deutscher makes a wonderful, ironic comment about this.
Isaac Deutscher writes the 3-volume biography of Trotsky in the 60s? 50s?
All right, 50s, 60s. They're called, in seriatim, the Prophet armed, the Prophet unarmed, the Prophet outcast. The Bolsheviks made a huge study, all Marxists did in those days, of the French Revolution. They wanted to know what had gone wrong with it, how it eventuated in Bonapartism, how could they prevent a Bonaparte from arising. They looked around their number. They were looking for someone flamboyant, ambitious, clever, with military genius, which obviously Trotsky is the one you have to fear Bonapartism from.
Because Stalin is the plotting
figure. Stalin, the boring, mediocre committee man who's always ready for another few hours of iron-bottomed attendance at the... They didn't think he had it in him to be a Bonaparte.
Right.
So if it's one of the most sad and in a way almost beautiful ironies of history. It's so tragic.
Segment 3, what if? Let me read you a question that we got from a Twitter subscriber. Here it is. And this is the question of questions. It's from a man, Eric Ford Holovinsky. Anyway, some say the USSR would have been better had Trotsky led instead of Stalin. How so? So let us cast aside segment 2, in which we just demonstrated that it would have been pretty hard for Trotsky, in fact, to have taken control, and just experiment here in our minds. If Trotsky is in charge instead of Lenin, how are things different, Christopher?
Instead of Lenin or instead of Stalin?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. If Trotsky takes charge instead of Stalin, sorry.
I think there would be less anti-Semitism. And I'm not just being tautologous, I think, because in general, less paranoia and less Russian, Georgian, if you like, chauvinism, backwardness and suspicion of the kind Stalin incarnated, that lead to things like not just purges, but show trials of a sort of fantastic inquisitional sort that are, almost pornographic.
Let me quote Bob.
I don't say there wouldn't have been some pretty warm work, and Trotsky's enemies would have been ruthlessly dealt with.
Let me quote Bob in Trotsky. Trotsky, I'm quoting you to yourself, Bob. If ever Trotsky had been the paramount leader instead of Stalin, the risks of a bloodbath in Europe would have been drastically increased.
Yeah.
How so?
Because he would have taken more risks in promoting the cause of revolution in Germany. They all agreed that there had to be a revolution in Germany, but Trotsky was prepared to take far more risks. The other thing so there would have been a bloodbath in Europe before Hitler.
Or perhaps
There would have
instead
been-
of.
Oh, instead of Hitler, yeah. Instead
Well,
of
I'm
Hitler.
not sure how much of a bloodbath that is if it preempts National Socialism.
But the other thing that would have happened had he succeeded Lenin in the mid-1920s the other thing that would have faced Trotsky was how would he have brought about the industrialization of the economy, which he said he was going to do, and how would he have pushed peasants into collective farms, which he also said he was going to do, without force. It's very, very unlikely that he wouldn't have taken the decision that actually some force would have been necessary. In other words, a sort of gentle Stalinism would have arisen under Trotsky's leadership. These two were blood brothers who hated each other. One a flamboyant, multilingual, world historical personality. The other
and an extremely good writer, by the way.
Extremely good writer,
Extremely good slinger of prose.
I mean,
Right, yes.
his autobiography is magical to read. Stalin, solid, stolid, plotting, careful, and also very steady. He didn't take off 4 months just to go and write a book on literature and revolution. But one way or another, the basic agenda of the two men was much more similar than it was dissimilar.
In fact, some of that doesn't even need to be speculative, because there was a point where Trotsky said that Labour should be, when he was fresh from running the army, he said the workers should be put in the army and put under orders. None of this sentimental dancing around about trade union rights and so forth. I mean, we need to basically make labor into conscription.
Let me just simply put before you several of the outrages of Stalin, and you tell me how they'd have been different, if at all, under Trotsky. The enforced famine in the Ukraine. Famine takes place, Stalin forces the kulaks, he sets up roadblocks so they can't escape from the famine, and effectively starves them out. Trotsky, what would have been different?
I don't think this would have been the same.
That would not have been the same.
There is something really, truly grotesque about what happened under Stalin, but something pretty grotesque would have happened under Trotsky, and it's only because we know how awful it was in the 1930s under Stalin that we tend to let Trotsky off the hook. That's my basic position. That
you grant that.
This section shows why sacred political missions and sacred religious missions rot in the same way. Once a movement claims it has the final truth, people stop being human beings and become material, to be shaped, punished, or sacrificed. Trotsky and Stalin disagreed on strategy, but the transcript makes clear their basic agenda was far more similar than different. Forced industrialization, collective farms, and labor treated like military conscription. That is the same poison religion uses when it calls obedience a virtue. Christianity tells people to surrender their will, carry a cross, and submit. History shows where that mindset leads. Authority first, freedom last.
Well, you can't, only because we know the material circumstances were very grim.
Yes.
I mean, there was a great deal of scarcity and dislocation that anyone would have had to deal with. I mean, I think there would have been a famine in the Ukraine if Generals Denikin and Kolchak and Wrangel had won the Civil War and defeated Bolshevism altogether. So I'm a materialist before I'm a Marxist on that. But Stalin...
You don't think so?
There's
No,
good
I don't
evidence that
think so.
Stalin used the famine to destroy Ukrainians.
To starve out his enemies, yes.
Queer Ukrainians, in other words, as a racist.
Right.
But famine
argument
wasn't
about
inevitable in the former Russian Empire. It was something that often happened. It was much more likely to happen with a centralized state-run economy where a few people at the center in Moscow take all of the big decisions. And if you've got a bungler like Stalin, it's more likely to happen than if you've got a somewhat more astute character such as Trotsky. But it was still a risk that you wouldn't be able to run an economy. It was an absolute certainty that you couldn't run that kind of economy and get the kind of results that you wanted for popular consumption, such as you can have under a market economy.
Of the purges, Christopher. Purges, I'm speaking very loosely here, by which simply to say even within the communist, Khrushchev drew the distinction that Lenin never killed a fellow communist. Stalin hardly ever stopped, right? So the notion was that anyone who might be in a position to pose some sort of threat to him, Stalin eliminated. Trotsky would not have done that?
Not in that way, no, I don't think so. Yeah, of course you're right. I mean, Stalin killed more communists than Hitler did, quite a lot more. And Stalin was paranoid. He had a sort of primitive mind, open to conspiracy theory. He didn't enjoy faction fighting. Trotsky loved it. He enjoyed polemics. He carried it on with people close to him all his life. Sometimes he's a bit thuggish in his prose, I've got to say. But you don't get the feeling that he secretly just wants to torture and kill anyone who gets in his way.
All right. Segment 4, Trotsky's, this, I'm borrowing a phrase from your essay on the Ivan Deutscher biography, Trotsky's moral moments. Christopher Hitchens writes of the second half of the 1930s as a moral moment for Leon Trotsky. Quote, Christopher, Trotsky was perhaps the most prescient writer of his day in warning of the true menace of National Socialism. Give us a sentence or two of explanation. National Socialism meaning, of course, the Nazis.
The rise to power in Germany of a sort of mechanized and highly modernized, but nonetheless sort of medievally cruel and superstitious movement based on a very primitive race theory of racial superiority. And Trotsky writes a marvelous polemic saying it's incredible to see how millions of Germans now use electrical lights
I'll quote
and drive
it
on autobahns, but do you believe in the power of signs and magical symbols?
Trotsky, quote, today there lives alongside the 20th century, the 10th or 13th. 100 million people use electricity and still believe in the magic power of signs and exorcism. Capitalist society is puking up the undigested barbarism. Such is the physiology of National Socialism. That's pretty good, isn't it?
That is good, but then if you take the whole of Trotsky in those years and not just that prescient
Christopher does call it a moment, moral moment.
commentary on Nazism, yeah, he was right about Nazism, although he still thought of Hitler as a mere puppet of the what he called the big bourgeoisie in Germany, rather than an independent actor who could do even more damage than any kind of right-wing movement yet known.
Here's the bit.
Yes, but I should just add that Stalin's line, the so-called third period of the Comintern line, the German Communist Party's line, was that Hitler was just that and no more, and that he could be allowed to win. And it would be no worse, because next would come communism. Hitler would just be a door opener for Red Germany. And Trotsky, writing to the German working class, saying, if fascism comes to power, it will ride over your skulls and your spines like a terrific tank. It will be the end of civilization. You have to make common cause with the Social Democrats. Make a united front against this monstrosity.
He understood.
It's Cassandra, Peter. It's like hearing Cassandra.
Christopher, but listen to this now. This business about 20th century, next to which lives the 10th or the 13th, people use electricity, still believe in the power of signs and exorcism. Couldn't almost every word of that have been said about the revolution in Russia, to which Trotsky devoted his life's energies? That this thing was in fact a kind of at least certainly that is the point that Pipes makes in his history of the Russian Revolution, and Bob touches on it again and again, that communism does not account for what took place in Stalin and indeed through to Gorbachev. You have to understand the Russian substructure of it all, that there's a kind of barbarousness which Marxism unleashes, right? So here's what I'm trying to say. We grant that he had a moral moment looking at the Germans and the rise of Hitler, but it seems to me you're being a little too forgiving that he didn't have a few moral moments about his own country.
Pipes overestimates, no, I suppose I mean underestimates, is the element of barbarism in Russia that has nothing to do with communism, but that is authentically Russian.
No, but that's exactly the point that Pipes is making.
Serfdom,
yes, no.
Tsarism, anti-Semitism, pogroms, the Black Hundreds, the Tsar being the head of the Orthodox Church.
That's precisely that is Pipes' point.
But there's another aspect of this moral moment, that at the same time as Trotsky pointed out the iniquities of Nazism, he thoroughly approved of the kind of revolutionary war that had been carried into Poland and hopefully, as he thought, into Germany in 1920. So when the moment comes for the Soviet Union to invade Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Eastern Poland,
he's all for it.
He's all for it. And he falls out with a lot of American Trotskyists over that very question. And when the Soviet Union invades Finland in the Winter War of 1939 to 40, the same thing. He's all for it. So his idea of foreign policy is not a sort of morally pure position at all. If you take the German case, it looks a bit that way. If you take the Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Polish, Finnish case, it doesn't look that way at all.
Yeah, sorry.
Trotsky's I'm quoting you once again to yourself. Trotsky's most enduring and tenacious battle was against the monstrous regime that had resulted from his earlier exertions.
Yes.
Stalin. On the other hand, as Bob has just told us, it's not as if Trotsky wrote off the Russian Revolution once Stalin had complete control of it. He was still a partisan.
There's a great argument among Trotskyisant or Trotsky-ish academics, intellectuals, historians, and so on, as to what would have happened if he hadn't been killed in 1940. In that, having always thought that the workers' state, however deformed or degenerated by Stalinism, was an advance over its rivals, even if extended by bayonets. After the Hitler-Stalin Pact, direct collusion,
right.
There's evidence that in his papers and in his arguments and correspondence, he was moving to a position of saying that actually Stalinism was a new form of barbarism. And that the only responsibility one would have historically would be to take the side of its victims. These are the last things he's writing before Stalin has him killed. So yes, the logic of this seems to be accepted by the person who we're talking about.
Segment 5, Trotsky Today. Robert Service. When Trotsky was assassinated, the idea again went the rounds on the Western political left that the tragedy of Soviet history lay in Trotsky's failure to win the struggle to succeed Lenin. Close quote. That somehow that it was Stalin instead of Trotsky is the tragedy of Soviet history.
Yeah.
Does that retain some currency today, does it not?
It sure does. And I think it's totally wrong. It's a romantic view of Trotsky. Trotsky was in favor of a one-party state, of mass terror, of an end to political and cultural pluralism. He was a thorough, schematic thinker and practitioner of all of that. The idea that somehow a humane version of communism could have come out of Trotskyism is pure romanticism. But it appealed to people in the 60s and the 70s who wanted just such a figure, someone who was standing outside all of the worries about the Vietnam War and all and wanted to think that there was a possibility that the USSR, if it had been differently led back in the 20s, then a different turn could have taken place.
Now,
The useful point here is brutal. Modern tools do not automatically create modern minds. People can use electricity, medicine, and science while still clinging to magic, prophecy, demons, and holy signs. That is exactly why religion survives. It borrows the benefits of reason, then tells people to distrust reason when it threatens doctrine. Christianity does this constantly. Accept hospitals, airplanes, and physics, then ask people to believe resurrection, exorcism, virgin birth, and eternal punishment. The transcript connects superstition with barbarism, and that is the real warning. A society can look advanced while still thinking like the Middle Ages.
which leads me to your thinking, because as I read your writings over a quarter of a century now, you subscribe to this.
Can't ask for more than that.
You subscribe to this. You really did fall for Trotsky. You were part of the if only school, were you not? Now you're not.
Well,
so what's happened?
less and less, but never.
Explain yourself. Not
Well,
Trotsky
no.
yourself.
Look, here's the thing. It's a matter of how many what ifs and if onlys one's allowed.
Very nicely put.
The American general who was sent to invade Russia after the First World War in Siberia. Remember how Ronald Reagan said that the US and the USSR have never had a fight? Yes, they had. The US was part of the foreign intervention after. I've forgotten his name. It was a Michigan detachment, though, because they were good fighters in the snow. He said that in the areas of Russia controlled by the whites, by Generals Kolchak and Denikin, he said he didn't know of anything in the annals of history that showed a regime that took human life at a lesser price than that.
Then the Tsars, essentially the Tsars.
If Trotsky's Red Army had not won the Russian Civil War, then the word for fascism, we have to face the fact, was probably going to be a Russian word instead of an Italian word. So we were not replacing a parliamentary democracy with an independent judiciary here. Okay? These things were not, so to speak, on the historical agenda. Now, that doesn't mean that communist teleological propaganda is thereby vindicated, but we've got no right to say that we're all completely sure that it's a disaster that Trotsky wins and the whites don't.
Mm.
Yeah,
will you buy that?
I think
that's fair. Is it?
It's a little exaggerated, but it's pretty fair that the whites had officers who were vicious, carried out a brutal civil war against the Reds.
Brought the protocols of the elders of Stalin to Europe in their backpacks when they left, which not doing us any favours. Brings the germinal of fascism with it.
But I mean, if the whites had won the Civil War, that wouldn't have been the end of the matter. I think they'd have had a hard time consolidating a far-right regime, just as the communists had a hard time in the 1920s consolidating a far-left regime. What I'm trying to say is that the discussion among the communist leaders, the factional fighting, was over a fairly narrow terrain. And to disregard that and to put up Trotsky as a humanitarian communist
a lot of nonsense.
is basically a lot of nonsense.
That really would be romantic. But don't forget my earlier point about 1905 either. In 1905, there aren't Bolshevik.
That was the chance.
Yes.
That was the chance.
And it's called, what becomes the Bolshevik Party is called the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party. And it's the Russian and international left that really hopes for a democratic and relatively peaceful victory over Tsarism, which, if it had been consummated, would have prevented the First World War in all likelihood.
Do you buy that?
Without the First World War, it's hard to imagine either Nazism or Stalinism taking the form that they did.
I think that if Russia had undergone a revolution in 1905, all sorts of forces would have been let loose, as they were in 1917, and
even if the liberals had managed to retain control of it, even if, who was it, Stolypin, the prime minister?
The big difference...
Or was that simply not fated to happen?
Well, it would have been difficult, but the big difference between 1905 and 1917 is the First World War. Mm-hmm. The brutalization and disruption of the First World War gave the communists their chance. They wouldn't have had the same chance, I agree with this, in 1905.
Christopher notes, Trotsky admits, as the Second World War is underway and his own life is drawing to a close, he doesn't know the ice pick is headed at his skull, but he knows he's in failing health, that the war might end without a socialist revolution. Quoting Trotsky, "We would be compelled to acknowledge," Trotsky wrote, "that Stalinism was rooted not in the backwardness of the country, but in the congenital incapacity of the proletariat to become a ruling class." In other words, we were wrong from the get-go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then it would be necessary to establish in retrospect that the present USSR was the precursor of a new and universal system of exploitation, which is the view of the president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev himself, in about 1989, 90, and 91, when the thing goes out of existence. Here's what I'm asking for a kind of moral and historical assessment.
Well, you may say he took a lot of persuading before he got
Yes,
to that,
an awful lot of persuading, and even then I'm not aware of... is there a word of remorse that he utters?
I don't think so. I mean, he does actually entertain this thought, only to dismiss it. In the end, he dismisses it. But at least he had the thought that actually the October Revolution of 1917 was founded on a falsehood.
Tens of millions dead, and it occurs to Trotsky that it may have been, oops, just a mistake.
Yeah.
But he puts that out of... All right.
And he's demoralized and ill, and he's expecting to die. The better thing for Trotsky would have been to have died several years earlier and to have stayed a martyr and not to have written the sort of stuff he wrote in the 1930s that condemn him in his own words as a weak version of Stalinist.
You reckon it would have been better for his reputation if he'd never written the Revolution Betrayed? That's the attack on Stalin.
You throw that in as well. I mean, it would be good if he'd written that too. But if he died somewhat earlier, if we didn't have the correspondence that he held with the American Trotskyists who said, how on earth can you support the USSR's invasion of Eastern Poland. What on earth do you think you're doing? Condoning what is essentially an alliance between the Third Reich and the USSR. What are you doing saying it's okay to invade Finland? And why on earth do you assert that Marxism-Leninism is a scientifically proven set of doctrines? Why are you getting so uptight about new ideas of philosophy
I wouldn't
and
be
social
without
science?
that stuff. You see, that's the difference.
You wouldn't be
I
without...
wish it had gone on a bit longer. I mean, it starts with a great discussion over Kronstadt, for which Trotsky was historically personally responsible.
Rebellion of the sailors.
garrison.
The naval garrison
right.
off Petersburg.
1921.
Which was put down by brutal force, and for which Trotsky accepted, as military commander, general responsibility. And it was brought up against him by a faction. Actually, I think one of them quite well associated with Hoover, James P. Cannon, in various polemics in the late 1930s, which are, I think, an imperishable read. They show a polemical mind and some very good rival polemical minds engaging at a very high level. I wish he'd lived another few years and had to accept the whole logic, which I think he would have done. I'd also love to see what he would have said about Zionism and Jewish nationalism after the evidence of the Second War.
Did he think of himself as Jewish?
He thought of himself as very...
He did.
He thought of himself post-ethnically, but
Yeah.
in terms of background, he was absolutely open about the fact that he was Jewish.
And
He
very
never
sensitive,
denied
very
that he-
sensitive to anti-Semitism as a weapon of reaction.
All right.
But no, he thought of himself as a cosmopolitan.
Right. We need to wrap it up at last.
Okay.
Claire Luce used to say that history gives each man, no matter how large, only one sentence. Lincoln freed the slaves. What's the sentence that history gives to Leon Trotsky, Christopher?
Well, this is a sentence about him, if
Yes.
on your Lincoln analogy.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's very good. I'll have to, I'll brood about it.
Will you? All right. You take a pass.
I'd say it would be a double verdict. Such a waste of a talent. This was the most amazingly brilliant man, a writer, a thinker, an active politician, but such a dreadful mistake of a life and a career and an ideological and revolutionary commitment.
I will give you
George Steiner's book, George Steiner's essay on him is called Trotsky and the Tragic Imagination. And with me, it's the element of tragedy which you don't find if you're usually talking about the fall of someone who is power hungry.
Christopher Hitchens, Robert Service, author of the forthcoming Trotsky. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge. Thanks for joining us.
The final point lands hard because it shows how dangerous ideology becomes when it refuses to admit failure. Trotsky could see, near the end, that the whole revolutionary promise may have been built on a false idea. The transcript says he entertained the thought that the October Revolution was founded on a falsehood, after tens of millions had already suffered under the system it helped create. That is what belief systems do when loyalty becomes more important than truth. They protect the doctrine, not the victims. And Christianity has the same disease. When prophecy fails, believers reinterpret it. When the Bible defends slavery, they call it context. When women are told to submit, they call it order. When eternal punishment is threatened, they call it love. The pattern is always the same. Never blame the doctrine, always blame the human being asking questions. So here is the real question. How many contradictions, failed promises, and moral excuses does a religion get before people finally stop calling it truth? Drop your answer in the comments. Do you think faith is a source of morality, or one of the oldest ways humans learn to excuse control? Like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you stand.